Ladies, I have a treat for you today. We all know we are aging, but do you know why we are aging? Today I have longevity expert Dr. Sandra Kaufman join me. Sandra is the founder of the Kaufman Anti-Aging Institute, a forward-thinking educational company with the overarching goal of educating the general public on why we age, but also how we can minimize the effects of aging to live longer, healthier lives. You're listening to Menopause Natural Solutions, episode 101, Why We Age and How to Slow It Down. Welcome to Menopause Natural Solutions, your podcast for all things perimenopause, menopause and beyond. Stay tuned as your host, naturopath Jennifer Harrington, explains how to use natural therapies to find your ultimate health and happiness during your transition. Welcome back, ladies. I'm here with our special guest, Dr. Sandra Kaufman. Welcome to Menopause Natural Solutions.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun. I can't wait.
And it's also going to be educational, which I know is something that you're very passionate about. Before we get into the chunk of the content today, I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about your background because you've got a very diverse background. Would you like to explain your career?
Sure. So once upon a time, I was a cell biologist. Bizarrely enough, I was a plant cell biologist, so it's not quite a human cell, but plants are just amazingly interesting, and I absolutely loved it. And I was on my way to getting a PhD when my dad pointed out that cells don't pay bills and perhaps I should go to med school instead. So I did, and I transferred over, and I sort of have this kind of crazy background in medicine as well. I did some general surgery and some neurosurgery, and I ended up in anesthesia. And it's actually kind of cool because anesthesia is pharmacology and pharmacobiology, and it's physiology, and it's all of the bodyology all sort of wrapped up. And I think that's just really kind of fun. And I was cruising along doing that, and I became chief of pediatric anesthesia at a children's hospital. And now I'm regional medical director of a whole lot of pediatric hospitals. But my big love is rock climbing. And I was hanging off a cliff when I was 44, 45. And it dawned on me that unless I stop aging, that all of this fun that I was having was going to come to a stop, or at least decelerate. And that's no fun. So I decided to take all of the crazy skill sets in front of me, gather them together, and try to figure out why we aged. And everyone thought that I was completely, a lunatic for trying to do this. Like, I wasn't at Harvard. I wasn't doing this. I wasn't doing that. How was I going to figure this out? But I actually kind of think that I did. And so my goal is to now share that information so that we can all have better lives.
Well, thank you, because I don't really want to age either. I love the idea of living a long, active, healthy life. And I actually want to have friends to join me in that journey. So it's good to know I won't be the only one, and you won't be the only one, that there'll be friends to join us on the journey. So thank you very much. I do know that you also have a wonderful book, The Kaufman Protocol, Why We Age and How to Stop It, and an app that goes with it. What I love, love, love about this book is how easy it is to read. You break apart the science. You go back to high school biology and you look at the cell and you look at the mitochondria and you look at the nucleus, but you explain what happens to this cell as we age. So we get an understanding from a cellular level of what is going on in our body. And then you don't just leave it there. Oh, well, you're doomed. See you later. You go, no, there's action steps we can take. And you do it in such a humorous manner that you want to read the science. You want to go and go, well, what can I do? What can I do? And you actually come up with real life solutions. And for me as a naturopath, these are common everyday supplements that I prescribe. So I was very, very happy to find out they do more than what I thought they did. So that makes me very happy to know that my patients are getting more bang for their buck with the supplements that they are having. And I particularly love your factory model. Would you mind explaining what the factory model is?
Sure. So as you said, a lot of people remember fifth grade biology, but perhaps not high school biology, and certainly not med school biology. So I tried to shrink everything down to understanding what a cell is, like a generic cartoon cell, what it does, and then how it changes over the course of time. And a lot of people that I know are absolutely blooming brilliant, but they don't understand how cells work. But a lot of people, or most people, would understand how a factory would work. So every time I came up with what a cell did, I decided to explain how a factory would sort of be a similar thing. So if I can kind of briefly run through how your cells age, I'll explain how the factory model works at the same time.
Fantastic.
So, and I call them the tenets because why not? It's kind of fun. It's just a good word. So tenet 1, I call DNA alterations. And this is all the things that can go wrong with your DNA. And in the factory, this is sort of like your informational system. So anything that's written down, mission statement, directions, any written information in your factory is essentially your DNA. And if we look at DNA ages for a lot of reasons, but the big two are basically your telomeres get shorter, and then we suffer from epigenetic modification. So how your DNA gets decorated and then how it processes and makes proteins changes over the course of time. And the good news is that we can't stop these things completely, but we can make them significantly better. So that is tenet 1. Tenet 2, which everyone loves, is the energy system or the mitochondria. Again, back to the factory, you have to have some sort of energy, solar, coal, whatever it's going to be. You have to have energy to run your factory. And mitochondria do that in our cells. Problems with mitochondria are severalfold. Number 1, the rate limiting thing in mitochondria over time is NAD deficiency. And the good news is that you can fix that. So anyone over the age of 40 should be by default on some sort of nicotinamide supplement. Comes in many forms. I don't know which one's better or worse. We can discuss that if you want, but everyone needs some NAD. Secondly, we suffer, or mitochondria suffer from free radicals because we use oxygen, because we're aerobic creatures. Oxygen becomes radicalized, meaning it gets an extra electron. And I like to think of this as little bombs in your factory, sort of destroying your energy systems. Your body is smart. It makes it its own endogenous free radical scavengers, but over the course of time, you don't make enough. So what we need to do is sort of enhance the ability to, number 1, make fewer free radicals, and 2, be able to scavenge them more effectively. So that's sort of mitochondria in a nutshell. You're going to ask me how we do this, right?
Yes. But if we can go back to tenet 1 for a second.
Yeah.
Telomere health and epigenetic modification. What can we do to slow that process down?
So the most famous thing to help your telomeres is astragalus. Some people call it astragalus, many, many different pronunciations. There's a small amount of stuff in there that helps your telomeres. Scientists have turned that into cycloestrogenol, TA65. Now there's 818. It's all sort of more and more fancy stuff, all coming from the same base, which is astragalus.
When I was at uni, when we were learning about, we used to call it astragalus. They changed it to astragalus to think about, I'm astragalusing behind. So people with low energy, that was something that we would consider.
Right. And so what's amazing is the only thing it really does is it helps your telomeres. And that means that your cells can turn over more frequently, because every time a cell replicates, you lose a little piece of the DNA at the end. And the shorter that gets, the shorter your life is going to be. And not every cell has the same length of telomeres, and not every chromosome has the same length of telomeres. But there's definitely an association between length of telomeres and length of life. So we want them to be as long as healthy as possible.
Does resveratrol also fit into that picture?
So resveratrol does not increase your telomeres. What it does is it reduces the stress that can contribute to telomere shortening.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, but not as well as some of the other things. And don't get me wrong, resveratrol is amazing, and it does some amazing things in other categories. And we're going to talk about how great it is in terms of activating your sirtuins. But it's also fantastic for your mitochondria. And in fact, in the DNA category, it's a fantastic epigenetic modifier, but it does not do too much for your telomeres.
Okay. So we were also talking about energy and mitochondria, and I brought you back to the DNA alterations. So with energy, you were talking about your mitochondria, you were talking about free radicals and how we can protect ourselves against free radicals. How can we protect ourselves?
So the most amazing free radical scavenger, and everyone that knows me knows I just love this, it's astaxanthin. It is, my family calls it the angry algae solution, because if you take the goo in bird baths, right, little tiny green algae, and you physiologically stress it, or as my kids say, if you just yell at a bird bath, these cells get all sort of gunky and they create orange globules. And these globules consist of astaxanthin. And that protects the cell from whatever physiologic stresses it's undergoing. And when we ingest it, it protects us from our physiologic stresses. So it is probably the most powerful fat-soluble free radical scavenger that we have. And we know that at least in skin, if you take it orally, it protects your DNA from sunburn, from UV radiation, and it can protect you from cancer. So it's
and you can get it in your diet.
You absolutely can. You absolutely can. So anything that is pink or reddish in the marine world is filled with astaxanthin. I play a game where I go to the grocery store or to buy fish, and I find the one that's the pinkest, and that has the most astaxanthin in it.
Fantastic. Okay, is there anything else we can do for our mitochondria, or should we move on to tenet 3?
I could talk all day about what you could do for your mitochondria. That's the fat soluble. The best, just to throw it in there, the best water soluble one is something called andrographylide. And I like this because it gets into different cellular aspects to protect different pieces of your cell. It's probably not as good as astaxanthin, but it's fantastic. And it's been shown to protect your neurons because it can get into the blood-brain barrier or through the blood-brain barrier. And it can decrease damage to your brain over time from free radicals.
That is so important.
It's so cool. Because if we want to live forever, we want to know that we're living forever.
Well, that's it. There's no point being around longer if you can't remember it or you have no cognitive function. So definitely very, very important.
Yes.
Tenet 3.
Tenet 3. So this is called pathways. In our factory model, of course, there's tons and tons of pathways. There's physical pathways, such as, the Lucille Ball candy going down the machinery kind of pathway. And then there's order feedback loops. There's all sorts of pathways. And in our body, there's a ton of pathways, but I like to think of the big 3. The first one are the sirtuins. You have 7 mammalian sirtuins, and these control all sorts of things having to do with aging. Controls how you store fat, where you store fat, how much endogenous free radical scavenger you're going to make. It controls how you're going to sleep. It decides how you're going to process nutrients. It is just sort of like this all-round amazing process. And interestingly enough, sirtuin 3 is actually in your mitochondria. So by upping that, you're also helping your mitochondria. But that's just small aside. Second cool pathway is the AMP kinase pathway. This registers energy and nutrients and tells your body to either make things or to slow down and hibernate. And if it tells your body to slow down and hibernate, it sort of puts you in a state where you're going to not age as much. And this is where caloric restriction diets sort of kick in. Because if you reduce your calories, your body says, aha, I am starving. Your AMP or your energy is, if you have a lot of energy, you have ATP, it's triphosphate, versus MP, which is monophosphate. So if you have more AMP, your body perceives that you are starving and you go into hibernation. So caloric restriction diets protect you via this mechanism. So that's kind of cool. I personally am really terrible at caloric restriction diets. So what I do is I take things that tell my body that I'm starving, despite the fact that I'm not. And
so you don't intermittently fast?
Oh, no, I wouldn't make it a day. Oh, no. But resveratrol, you seem to like that one. That's a caloric restriction mimetic. It turns AMP kinase on and it activates all of the processes that are exactly the same as caloric restriction diets. And there's several things that do it. Metformin does it. Bavarian does it. Several very cool things do it.
Nice to know.
There you go. You don't have to starve.
Okay, so sirtuins, AMP kinase, we're looking at caloric restriction or things that will help us, like the resveratrol that we spoke about.
Yes. So the third one in this category is the mTOR pathway. And I kind of like to gloss over this a little bit. It's a little bit controversial because the mTOR pathway is a pathway of building. And as you get older, you don't need to build that much. And it's been shown that if you block this pathway, you tend to do better. Unfortunately, there are certain aspects of your body that need to keep turning over. So people that take a lot of rapamycin, for example, are more likely to have sarcopenia, meaning muscle wasting, because muscles have to turn over. And they're also more likely to have hippocampal failure, which is tragic because that's where your memories are. So I worry that by deactivating your mTOR mechanisms, you're going to sacrifice your memory. So I'm not really not willing to go down that pathway. So that's not going to happen. Anyway, so those are the big three pathways, and that is tenet 3. Tenet 4 is quality control. So back to our factory model, everyone says, you have to check your widgets. What are you making? And you need to make sure it's all high quality stuff. Cells make proteins, and proteins fail over time, and we have mechanisms that check them and fix them. And in the same light, DNA fails over time, and we have mechanisms that check it and fix it. And people always think that this is kind of crazy, but every cell every day has 10 to the 5th DNA errors. So that's a lot. I can't even tell you. So your little cellular processes are running around like crazy trying to fix your DNA, because if it fails, you're more likely to have cell failure, apoptosis, and or cancer, which are things that we just generally do not want. So what can we do in that particular problem? There's a wonderful thing called fern block. It comes from a plant called Polypodium, and it increases DNA repair mechanisms.
Very cool.
So a natural product, super cool, can only help you.
Well, I'll have to add that to my stack.
If your stack's going to look like mine, I take 50 some agents a day, because every time I try to make it shorter, I think, I can't possibly get rid of any of these. They're all so amazing.
It's a problem. Yes.
I know.
I cycle mine over time. So there's always room to put something else in, and maybe something's less of a priority, kick that one out, or just depends on what I'm working on. But there are some basic ones that stay, like magnesium. That's never coming out. That's staying in every day.
So that's an interesting. So what type of magnesium do you take?
I'm on Threonate at the moment, but that's what changes. Yes. I change sometimes depending like what's going on. If I want to work on my brain or if I've got muscle soreness, I might swap the type. But why did you get so excited about the form of magnesium I'm taking?
Because I think that the only one that anyone needs to take is the Threonate. So I was so excited that you're on Threonate, because the magnesium molecule splits apart, and it's the Threonate. It's the only one that gets into your blood-brain barrier. So it's the only one that increases hippocampal turnover. So if you want to maintain your intelligence as you get older, that's the one.
Okay, so that's not getting cycled anymore. That one is staying. All right. So we were talking about quality control.
Yes. Wait. So the last thing in quality control is autophagy. And I didn't used to talk about this one that much because there wasn't a whole lot we could do. Autophagy is basically cellular recycling. Mm-hmm. So within your little cell, an organelle just decides to break down, and your cell takes it apart, disassembles all the pieces and parts, and reuses it to make a brand new one, which I think is insanely cool, right? Very smart.
Well, we're big on recycling these days, so it's how fantastic that our body is recycling while we're off recycling.
Right? Like it took our bodies, hundreds of millions of years to figure this out. I guess even longer for us on the outside world here. But cells are so smart. They're so incredible. But there wasn't a whole lot we could do about autophagy until I stumbled onto spermidine. And spermidine is going to be in book 2 that is sitting at the editor's desk as we speak. And spermidine does, in fact, come from sperm or ejaculate, because it just does, and everyone freaks out about that. But it, in an epigenetically driven way, it changes the EP300 system, blah, 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 leading to increased autophagy. So it's just amazing for you.
Have you ever looked at urolithin from pomegranate?
So urolithins come from a lot of different places. I've not looked at it from pomegranate, but it comes from other sources. And yes, it'll be in book 2.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I go through the entire urolithin A versus B versus C versus here versus there. Yes. Oh, very nice. It's common. It's common.
All right. I just love pomegranate because it's also a phytoestrogen. So for my audience, that's kind of important. So yes. Good to know also that it does so many more things. And I only, well, not only, but I know it from the point of view that it helps mitochondria with autophagy. So, but I can't wait to read the second book because I love the first one. So I'm sure I'll love the second one and I will learn more. All right. So moving on to tenet number 5.
So let's see. Tenet number 5, inflammation and security, right? So when you are young, your immune system protects you. It's fantastic. You don't get sick. It's lovely. As you get older, it starts attacking you and you become systemically inflamed. And all these cells that used to be useful are now just horrific. And so I like to equate this with the security system at a factory, right? When the security guards are nice and young, they're walking around, they're protecting you from the outsiders. And when they get old, they're kind of fat, dumpy, sit in the corner and eat donuts, and they're really not very helpful anymore. So that's probably horrible, and someone will not be happy with my analogy, but that's just the way that it is. But inflammation as you get older is an absolutely horrible, horrible thing. We all have it. And if we don't get rid of it, it just causes even more problems. Leads to cancer, leads to leukemias, leads to all sorts of terrible things. So you're going to ask me what to do.
No, I was going to say it actually has its own term, inflammaging, because it's inflammatory-based aging. And you don't have to be old to have inflammatory-based aging. It can start quite young.
Oh, it's horrible. And in fact, the more inflamed you are, the more negative effects it has on cells. For example, when you are turning over your bone, osteoblasts build bone, osteoclasts degrade your bone, right? So you want one and the other to be sort of equal to maintain your bone. However, as we get older, osteoblasts are not very active and osteoclasts become more active, so we become osteopenic. Inflammation activates osteoclasts. So the more we age and the more inflamed we are, the more osteopenic we become. And in a postmenopausal world, that is tantamount to horrible. Yes. So we do not want to be inflamed.
So what do we do about it?
So my absolute most favorite anti-inflammatory has got to be curcumin.
Which is from turmeric. Just letting my audience know in case they hadn't heard it before.
Yes. However, sometimes when you eat the food, it helps. And sometimes it's just not good enough. And I have to tell you in this instance, it's just not good enough.
It's not absorbed.
Well, no. So 1 to 5% of turmeric is actually curcumin. So a tiny, tiny bit. And the stuff that does get absorbed only lasts for about an hour. So the bioavailability is pretty terrible. So unfortunately, you have to take in one of these super not so natural forms. My favorite is something called metacurcumin. It's in a nanomycel. So people say, well, is it natural? Is it not? And I like to think it's sort of like souped up natural. It's like, it's a superhero, right? It started out very, very good and healthy and original, and it's just been boosted a bit to help us out. So I don't know if that is offensive to anyone, but that's just the only way that it works.
Well, if we want the benefit, then we actually need to absorb it. So if anything's going to help us to absorb it, it's going to help us to get the benefit, then I think it's both. It's from a natural source, but like you said, being pumped up, and I think, that's the way we're going to have to go in the future.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is. It is.
Especially when we're looking at our environment. Our environment's not that great these days. We're more polluted. We've got more chemicals. We've got more metals than we ever had before. We need stronger substances to help us overcome this. So it's not going to be that food will be adequate, although food is a great start. You need that as a foundation, but these added supplements and adjuvants to really boost us up. So turmeric is your number one curcumin is your number one anti-inflammatory agent. Do you have any others that you love?
Oh gosh, there's so many of them. They're just amazing, amazing stuff. So one of my favorites that I'm working on right now is something called lactoferrin. Lactoferrin, of course, comes from milk, comes from human milk. It comes from cow milk. There's the most is actually in camel milk, which I find really humorous. And as an aside, I bought some camel milk to see what it would taste like. It's not so great. Don't. But lactoferrin is really, really interesting because in your body, it's measured as an inflammatory agent. So it gets released by your cells in an inflammatory state. But when it gets released, it tells your body to stop being inflamed. It's like the cutoff valve. So
I like that.
It's really rather interesting. So if you have more lactoferrin in your body, it can actually sort of truncate the inflammatory response. So it helps the innate and the innate response, but then it just makes the rest of it dissipate. So it's just, I think it's an amazing molecule. The other cool thing is, of course, it's an iron carrier, which is why it's called lactoferrin. So if you need more iron in your body, it brings it in. And if you have too much, it gets rid of it. It's like this great moderating agent. It's just unbelievable.
And that's also very important at this stage of life because a lot of perimenopausal women are anemic and a lot of postmenopausal women have iron overload. So that's a very good one to know from that point of view as well. All right. So that was tenet number 5. What is tenet number 6?
So six I call individual cell needs. And this in our factory model it sort of corresponds to all the different workers, right? So you open up your factory. You've got people that come in for the summer, like the young kids. They don't really do much, use them, they burn out, they're toast. Then you've got people that come in, they're there for 10 years, 20 years. Then you've got the guys that have been there like forever, 50, 100 years. So the fast turnover guys, those are your red cells. They last for 3 months, use a lot of nutrients, and then poof, they're gone. You got to make new ones. Your bone cells, with the exception of your inner ear, your liver, your heart, they all last about 10 to 12 years. Your neurons, for the most part, last about 90 to 100 years. So depending on the life cycle, the lifespan, are they mobile, are they not mobile, your cells need different things. And one of the things you mentioned is that you need to sort of be nutrient stable before you start any of this. Yeah. And what I like to tell people is I think despite, or however old anyone is, I think everyone should be on prenatals because I think you need to treat all of your cells like little baby cells, and they need things to be able to turn over well, efficiently, without being deficient in anything, because they need to make the proteins to continue your life.
It's a good insurance policy, because even if you are on the best diet, it's still food from this planet. So our soils are deficient. Therefore, we're not going to get those nutrients in the food that we're eating. So I think, yes, start with a great diet, but B, adding in a multivitamin, and you preferred the prenatals because they're higher in quantities, then I think that's a very, very good point.
Okay, so let's see. Oh, and the other thing in this category are senescent cells and stem cells. And of course, we want to take care of our stem cells as much as possible. And there's certain things that we can do for that. And then we want to get rid of our senescent cells. And of course, there are certain things we can do for that. And in the senescent cell category, one of my favorite things is quercetin. Quercetin, of course, comes from onions, although you probably can't eat enough. I think I calculated like 4 bags of onions a day for a little while.
You wouldn't smell very good.
I don't think you'd have too many friends. But that being said, it's a great molecule. It's, they produce it to mimic the natural one, and it does several things. So not only does it get rid of senescent cells, it actually blocks.
You haven't explained what senescent. Sorry for talking over. Yeah, you haven't explained what senescent cells are.
Oh, I am so sorry.
I love this analogy.
So a senescent cell. Some people call them zombie cells. I call them grumpy old men cells. So if you take a normal cell, it's sitting there, it's doing its thing, and then it gets DNA damaged for whatever reason, right? 10 to the 5th DNA errors per cell per day gets damaged. So then your cell goes into a state of hibernation, and this is called quiescence. And the cell tries to fix itself. And if it can, fantastic, you're back and running. If it cannot, it either dies like a good respectable cell, or it becomes a senescent cell. And these change morphology. They get fat, they release cytokinins, and they're just evil. any areas of pathology are filled with senescent cells, and it's kind of contagious. So one senescent cell exudes cytokinins, and the ones down the street become senescent, and it is just this sort of nidus of horrible inflammatory cytokinins. And I just love the analogy to grumpy old guys, right? There's the old guy sitting in your factory, and he is just grumpy, grumpy, grumpy. Anyone walks by him, he makes them grumpy, and it brings your entire house down because grumpiness is contagious, right? So we want to just kick these guys out. We don't want them. So we want either quercetin works, fisetin, which is related on a molecular basis, is actually from strawberries. That helps. And then there are a few chemotherapy agents that your people aren't going to like, but they work as well. But the idea is we want to get rid of senescent cells. And if you are someone that has a lot of trauma, so you've got pathologic areas, the bad back, the bad knees, or you've had cancer and you've had chemotherapy, you probably have a huge senescent cell load, and it would be extremely beneficial to sort of clear them out.
What I was going to say before was in the book, you call them spiteful, grumpy old men.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, they are.
I can really picture it. That's what I love about the factory model. Like, you can picture it. You can imagine what's going on inside your body, and it just makes it so much more understandable, but also more humorous. So it's not a dry book. So if you want to go out and get the Kaufman Protocol, I promise you will giggle at least once.
The jokes are so bad, I have to say. Sometimes I just apologize for them. I set up a booth at a conference and was selling these books, and I had these two guys like almost screaming at each other because one was like, a normal non-scientific guy, and he was like, oh my God, these jokes are so funny, they got me through the book. And the other guy was an academic who's like, I have denigrated the science of longevity by including bad jokes, and how dare I, and it's so inappropriate. And they were screaming at each other. And I thought, well, if I can sort of, initiate so much, emotion, at least they're reading the dang thing, right? But I was like shocked at their enthusiasm.
But it's also when your goal is to educate people. You don't need to educate the scientists that already know. This is more a book for people that need to know, that don't know. And by making it in a humorous manner, they're more likely to read it. They're not going to get through the first page and go, oh, this is too technical, I'm going to put it aside. They're going to keep going, and they're going to have a greater understanding and a greater chance of actually making a change.
Well, I hope so. That was the goal. So I hope so. Yeah.
So we were talking about individual cell needs, and we were talking about senescent cells. So tenet 7.
7. So like any factory, you're closing the doors at night, you have to take out the trash. So I call tenet 7 waste management. And in this category, the big one is glucose, right? We all know that glucose is bad for us, although people don't know why glucose is bad for us. But glucose is very sticky. I say that it's sticky on the outside, right? It gets all over our fingers. It's also sticky on a molecular basis on the inside. And it loves to stick to proteins, and it sticks to DNA, and it sticks to lipids. And it creates these things called AGEs, advanced glycation end products, which of course is my absolute favorite acronym, right? Because ages, right? No one likes ages. So when you have glucose and you have oxidative stress, it creates the environment. It's a 6 to 7 non-enzymatic step whereby this glucose molecule bonds onto something and destroys it. So by doing this, number one, the protein that it's stuck to gets destroyed. It doesn't work. If it sticks to DNA, it doesn't work. And actually that can precipitate autoimmune disease, which is unfortunate. And these AGEs are sticky. So they stick to proteins all over, and they cause special damage to collagen, because collagen is a very long-lived protein. So it's one of the reasons that we have collagen failure, and it's why our skin droops, and it's why we have congestive heart failure, and it's one of the reasons we have high blood pressure as we get older. So we need to limit our glucose so we can limit our AGEs. Or, of course, you can just do the wrong thing, which is what I do, is I eat glucose, but I block all of the 7 non-enzymatic steps. So I try to short circuit the system, but I'm not really sure I should recommend it.
And I kind of wouldn't recommend it. I think maybe do what you can with your diet. And if you're on holidays, or if there's a special event, then do what you do. What do you do? Let us know, so when we are on holidays, we know what we should be doing.
So there's different ways of doing this. There's certain agents that block the enzymes in your intestinal wall, which prevent the breakdown of carbohydrates into sugar. So that's step one. Step two, you can block glyconeogenesis in your liver. So you can block making new glucose. You can block breaking down of glucose. You can block glucose sticking to proteins. And then lastly, you can use this decoy system where you send in stuff and it bonds to either the glucose or the AGE molecule, and then you excrete it out in your urine. So it's a whiff of a complicated system, but it seems to work.
Okay. And so you've mentioned the steps. What are the substances?
So what's really interesting and what people, I hope, sort of realize is that there's not a 1-to-1 ratio of substance X does tenant 2. It just doesn't work that way. Some things do many things.
I like that.
Right? The problem is it just becomes this crazy organizational system of how do you know what you're covering? And this is actually what I kind of became a little bit known for. I don't think famous is the word because it's a very small community. But what I did is every agent that appeared to be helpful with longevity, I went into the literature and I looked for every possible study I could and what did it do, if anything, in each of these 7 tenets. And I rated it. And if it did absolutely nothing in any one category, it got a 0 in that category. If it did something in a test tube or in culture, or in theory sometimes, it got a 1. If it did it in a mouse model, rat model, anything other than a human model, it got a 2. And if there was substantial human evidence, it would get a 3. So every agent comes with a 7-digit rating number that, at some point, maybe I'll turn it into a barcode, but it's like 0.3.1.2, blah, blah, blah. And I don't ever expect anyone to learn these numbers, but the idea is when you are creating a protocol for yourself, you pick agents so that when you add the numbers together, every category is covered. For example, some people are convinced that taking 17 antioxidants is the way to go. Well, that's fabulous. So in category 2, you get got a zillion points, but you're not going to not age if you haven't covered your DNA or your repair mechanisms or something of that nature. Yeah. So the idea is the rating system tells you how to create something sort of in a more fair fashion.
And I like that in the book, you've also got tables. So when you go through each of the individuals, there is that rating at the bottom, but also at the back, there's a reference, there's a table where you can go through and sort of go, right, you can double check, have I got everything covered? What substances am I taking? And I like that you also split it up. Well, we don't split it up, but you can see you've got some natural substances in there, you've got some not so natural substances, so you can pick and choose. If you want to be all plant-based or all natural-based, you can, right, I'm going to use these ones. If you're happy to try some pharmaceuticals, they're there as well.
Well, the idea is I'm not holistic. I'm what I call efficacious, right? If something works, I honestly don't care where it came from. And I respect that some people do, absolutely. And I want all of the information to be available. People can choose to take whatever they want. I just want people to have educated options. Right. For example, there are many things that you can't get from a vegetarian diet, and people love vegetarian diets, but there are just some things that you cannot get, and they need to know that. Right. So just the idea is just to be generally educated. And you're absolutely right. In book 1, there's a table and it has 15 agents in it. Book 2 will have an additional 28.
Wow.
And I do not mean in any way for someone to take all of them. Certainly you can, but you don't have, clearly the idea is to pick and choose and select what's right for you based on the education that's available.
This would have taken you hours and hours and hours and hours of work, yet alone to go through the research, to look at the tally system, to see what works, what doesn't work. Thank you. Thank you for putting in that time and that effort. And sorry for your kids and family.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's interesting how much time we waste on a regular basis because, as you mentioned, this is not my job. This is a hobby. I have a busy life as an anesthesiologist, but I come home and my kids are teenagers and they have homework. So we all sit and we do our homework together. And I think it teaches many things. It means that even as adults, we're still learning. We can still contribute. That there's time for work, there's time for play, there's time to contribute to society. And with any luck, I'm being a good role model. I'm sure sometimes they just think that I'm nuts, but that's okay.
Well, look, thank you so much for your time, not just for the book, but your time here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I have learned a lot. How do my listeners find you?
So, excellent question. I have a website. It's thekaufmanprotocol.com. The book is the Kaufman Protocol. I'm really not very creative in all of this. At the moment, the app is not working very well. We are rebuilding it. So I'm asking people not to use it right now, because then they get on it and it's frustrating, blah, blah, blah. But I can't cancel it because the users that it does work for would shoot me as well. So I'm sort of in this like mucky middle ground at the moment. So for new users, I encourage you to look at the information on the website, look at the book, which of course is on Amazon. And if anyone has any questions at all, I answer all emails myself. It does take me a little while to do it because, as you pointed out, I'm a little shy on time, but I take every email seriously and I answer everyone's questions.
So Sandra, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure my listeners do as well.
My absolute pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Menopause Natural Solutions. This podcast contains general information about menopause. It is provided as a guide, and it is not intended to replace medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend.